exclusion of women in decisions that affect their life is bad corporate governance. It should not be allowed. This is why, at this point in 2021, when we are at crossroads, we have to bring this to an end.
That is UN Women Executive Director Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka speaking at this year's virtual International Women's Day event. You're watching Our Voices. I'm Ndimyake, Mwakalyelye. While gender inequality persists, women are starting to find their way into key decision-making positions. Women, particularly Black women, are breaking barriers. VOA's Mariama Diallo looks at some of those achievements.
It's been a history-making year for Black women. Tanzania's Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan became the country's first female president on March 19th, according to the Constitution, after the untimely death of its leader John Magufuli, whose second term was to end in 2025. In recent years, other African women have climbed to top positions.
As of now, Africa has had 22 women, heads of state or heads of government, meaning presidents or prime ministers, whether it's interim or acting or fully elected, and coming from 15 African countries.
This includes Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Malawi's Joyce Banda, Ethiopia's Sahle-Work Zewde, the Central African Republic's Catherine Samba Panza, among others. Senegal has had 2 female prime ministers, and other African countries have had female vice presidents, including Gambia, Zambia, and Tanzania. Also making history in 2021, economist and former Nigerian government minister Ngozi Okonjo Weala. On March 1st, she became the first woman and the first African to hold the position of Director General at the World Trade Organization. And earlier this year, another history-making moment in the United States.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
In January, Vice President Kamala Harris became the first African American and first woman to hold the second highest office in the U.S. She attended Howard University in Washington, where Mohamed Saliou Camara leads the African Studies Department.
You know, she ran for president with a good stage of candidates, and she earned her own rights and respect to be picked as the running mate of the Democratic nominee.
Harris is the daughter of an Indian mother and Jamaican father. But Camara says challenges remain as some countries appoint women to top positions that come with some influence, but no real power. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Oulimata Sarr is the UN Women Regional Director for Central and West Africa. She says key to the fight for equality for women are respect for their rights, representation, and adequate resources. Sarr also stresses the importance of the support from men who could help push the needle even further for women.
The COVID-19 has shown to the world the issues of women, the gender gap, the risk that we are taking. I like to remind everybody that 70% of the people in the health sector are women, meaning that women are actually at the front line of the fight against the COVID. The second thing I like to remind everybody is that today the women are bearing the brunt of the economic downturn. A lot of people now understand why our advocacy and our policy work in ending violence against women is so critical. Because I think there's a common understanding and a fact now that violence against women is real. And I think the Secretary General of the United Nations made a very strong plea, about silencing the guns, he called it, during this period, and also ending what we call the shadow pandemic. Because as we're looking at the sanitary issues, there are some underlying critical issues for women that are not being addressed.
How would you describe the role that the UN is playing? The majority of women are the frontline fighters of this disease, yet sometimes the least equipped, and sometimes not even really involved in some of the conversations around how to better fight this pandemic.
We are still having the conversation about rights, representation, and resources. We call it the 3 R's. We need to address the issues of rights, so women's rights, sexual rights, land rights. We need to address our issue of representation. If you look in the continent right now, if you look at 20 countries with the most women in parliament, 5 of them are in African countries. You have Rwanda, you've got South Africa, Senegal, if I recall, Namibia are really on top of the list of parity and representation in decision-making position. Today, we have a study that shows that there's still $42 billion, dollars in terms of financing gap for women, that women are still struggling in 2021 in accessing any form of finance. And during the COVID-19, even harder, because some of these stimulus packages and recovery plans are asking for collateral, so you can get some loan, grace period. I mean, the issue of collateral is a big issue for women.
I guess your expectation is the trajectory where it's going forward, more women accumulating along the way, as opposed to the seesaw where on one hand you have women and then another year you have less women. How do you explain that?
We don't want the queen bee syndrome. And usually men will take us into that conversation. They will have one woman that every time we talk about our representation in parliament, that is 5%, they will tell, well, you have a speaker of parliament.
Right.
I rather have 50-50 representation than have 5% and the speaker of parliament. Because then how do that one single voice transform the agenda?
What are you excited about in terms of where women are making progress, where you can say that, this is something to emulate in other areas?
I would say in economic empowerment, the body of research shows us that particularly in Africa, we are the most entrepreneurial women. And that's what I'm excited about. And I think that potential to leapfrog, to take Africa out of poverty is in the hands of the women. But at some point, you have to enlist the men and the boys. Those people are going to be in those rooms where we are not. And we need them to be fully aware of our issues and to be able to amplify our voices. And we were very successful in bringing the traditional leaders into this conversation. And I think that's how we can enlist men and boys in what we call positive masculinity.
Oulimata Sarr is the UN Women Regional Director for Central and West Africa. She spoke with us from Dakar, Senegal. We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, Tanzania has a new president, a woman. We'll tell you more about her and the historic implications it has when we come back.
We're bringing women's voices to the conversation, and more than that, we're building a community of inclusion and empowerment.
Here in Kinshasa, campaigns to raise awareness against the spread of coronavirus are common, but getting that information to people who have no access to water, electricity, or money can be a challenge.
We are here at KARIBU market in Uganda, Kampala, where in this whole market, women are crying out for their situations to change.
For women, it will be better for us.
I think a big thing for me is just being able to say that when these protests are happening, does it turn around into policy?
Our kids are raped every single day.
This movement got the government to listen. It really was powerful because it showed what is possible when men and women band together and say, enough is enough.
It's not necessary anymore to climb on a car. I can be in any place to cheer with the people.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. Tanzanians are still mourning the death of President John Pombe Magufuli. But as they mourn, they are also celebrating the inauguration of a new president, a woman, the first in the country's 60 years of independence. The swearing in of Samia Suluhu Hassan makes her Africa's only current female national leader. Under the constitution, Hassan will serve the remainder of Magufuli's second 5-year term, which does not expire until 2025. First elected as Magufuli's running mate in 2015, the pair was re-elected in October of last year in a disputed poll, with opposition leaders and observers claiming the election was marred by irregularities. A former office clerk and development worker, Hassan began her political career in 2000 in her native Zanzibar, a semi-autonomous archipelago, before being elected to the National Assembly on mainland Tanzania and assigned a senior ministry. The 61-year-old is affectionately known by Tanzanians as Mama Samia, to reflect the high esteem in which she is held, rather than her gender role. A Dar es Salaam columnist and blogger says this is big for Tanzania.
We sense her gravitas, we appreciate her intellect, we look forward to her calm and competent approach to politics. This is really big.
Many, however, are curious to know what she will do for women. Analyst and director of KARIBU Tanzania organization, Majid Mjengwa, believes she will not disappoint her fellow women, though she may be challenged by lack of adequate resources.
There is a hope now that we have at last a woman in the State House. She can even continue, but the expectations are quite high, and I could put them in two levels. The first level is the policy one, and the second is more of the social. In the policy level, there are now expectations that being a woman president, she could really walk the talk. She has been talking about women empowerment, economic empowerment. But when it's come to socially, there are also expectations among women in Tanzania that having a woman president, they will have a really better life, and that means money. The question is where the money coming from.
President Hassan is from the island of Zanzibar. How significant is that?
It's very special coming from the tiny island of Zanzibar. Population is only 1 million, and I've been in Zanzibar several times, and I also been in the rural areas in Zanzibar. Women in Zanzibar are also having very difficult talking about poverty. So there might be high expectation as well in Zanzibar, that having a woman president coming from Zanzibar will help them. And again, the challenge will be that it's all about money, and she needs money to implement those plans that she might have in mind.
What's on the top of your list in terms of what is the expectation from women specifically?
Women in Tanzania are very, very well organized in groups and having difficulties in accessing loans. And now we're having a woman president. It could be easier. And there are also social problems like gender violence, sextortions. These are the things that were not top on agenda, but it's really affecting millions of women in Tanzania. When we talk about sextortion, it has been a report, for instance, quite recently, showing that there's a lot of sextortion, corruption in the universities, affecting women, and we hope, they hope, and we also hope, as a man, the woman president will really spearhead the fight against gender violence, but also sextortion.
Another African woman who broke the glass ceiling is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the new head of the World Trade Organization, WTO. She says in these challenging moments, there is no time for business as usual. Our Mariama Diallo has more.
I'm very proud to be the first African. I'm proud to be the first woman.
Newly appointed World Trade Organization Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala says while she's humbled and proud of her history-making role, it's important to have the competence to deliver results.
I'm focusing on delivery. I'm focusing on getting results. And I want to make sure that people remember my continent producing the first leader of the WTO that made a difference.
And this is not the first time the 66-year-old has made history. She was the first woman to serve as finance minister for several years and also the first female foreign minister in Nigeria. She also spent 25 years at the World Bank before returning to her country in 2003. On Twitter, an outpouring of support from bank officials celebrated her appointment. Okonjo weala says trade is about people and lifting those who have been marginalized, such as women and owners of small and medium-sized businesses, into the mainstream. Fellow Nigerian Nkoyo Toyo, a former member of parliament and former ambassador to Ethiopia and the African Union, has worked with Okonjo weala and says she is a trailblazer.
Ngozi is someone who is a great innovator. Ngozi, it's more about what can I do differently and what change can I bring to a very difficult situation.
Toyo says she will bring a fresh perspective to issues such as international trade talks in the face of persistent U.S.-China conflict.
I think the unique position Ngozi finds herself in is trying to ask the question, what about the rest of the world? And that gives her the space.
She will have to quickly address the devastating impact of the coronavirus pandemic, where she says the WTO can do a lot.
So a very top priority for me would be to make sure that we come to some solutions as to how the WTO can help make vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics accessible in an equitable and affordable fashion to all countries, particularly to poor countries, because right now we are lacking equitable access.
The appointment, which takes effect March 1st, came after U.S. President Joe Biden endorsed her candidacy, which had been blocked by former President Donald Trump. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
Howard University Associate Professor of Political Science, Dr. Jarpa Dawuni, recalls a time when women were powerful, particularly pre-colonial times, when they occupied high-level positions, including in the army. Professor Dawuni says she wants to see women reclaiming that power.
I personally like to look at my feminism from a perspective of what are the positive stories we can tell and we can highlight. I go back always to the African systems of feminism, of women's organizing and women's leadership. Traditional roles that have been played by women, leadership roles, pre-colonization, these roles were upset or changed during colonization. And after colonization to this period, we're trying to go back somehow to some of these leadership roles. Right. So if you look at the fact that within African countries, pre-colonial, women were military leaders. They fought in wars. Yes. The political, the social, the economic, the religious spaces that women occupied are things that I see as what we are seeing with these different developments happening. So yes, within the United States, we have had the election of Kamala Harris, who is an alumna of Howard University. And so it is a great achievement for Black women, for women of color, for women of Southeast Asian origin, and for women everywhere. We just don't want to see that one woman at the top. We want to see an institutional cultural change so other women in these spaces can feel comfortable and contribute their best. At UN Women, the director is from South Africa. We also have the undersecretary from Nigeria and many other spaces where women are occupying leadership positions. So these show that there's progress being made, but there's still a lot to be done.
We've had also women leaders on the continent, and we've had also an organizational level, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma heading the African Union Commission. What was the advantage of having the women in those kind of powerful platforms?
I study women in courts, the National Court of Justice. Yes. We have for the first time an African woman, Judge Julia Sebutinde from Uganda. African women are making progress and getting into these leadership positions. But you're right. The question becomes, what has the trickle-down effect been? A quote that was given by Judge Julia Sebutinde, that often we don't ask the question of what have the men done all these years when they've been in these positions of leadership. But when the woman comes, we ask, what did she do for the women? The question should be, how are institutions going to change the norms that have been built around men, manhood, and patriarchy, so that other women within those institutions, but most importantly, that woman at the top doesn't remain a symbol only, but that the policies would be open to create a change we want to see at the lower levels.
In a nutshell, just to wrap up this conversation, what would you want to see happen that you feel would make it the era for the women?
That women would own their place. I like to use the word women's enhancement, right? So I'm owning this to be quoted on that, because that tells us, and that tells a woman or women that you already have the power. How can we move you to the next level? I want to see young girls, I want to see young women, and I want to see women, professional women, non-professional women, and specifically within the African context, going back to our basics, knowing and owning our history as women leaders, as women who had capabilities pre-colonial, and that these capabilities, we can continue to build on those and to find new ways of engaging with the world and having our voices heard. So what do I want to see? That as the UN Women has put forth generation equality, that we all will be part of the fight towards equality, because equality means equal opportunities, equal outcomes, and equal benefits for all.
Dr. Jarpa Dawuni is an associate professor of political science at Howard University here in Washington, D.C. We spoke with her via Skype. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll speak with a leadership expert who coaches women on how to prepare to lead. And we'll also hear from you as you share your thoughts on women in leadership and question if women are really advancing in gender equality.
No, women are not being heard when it comes to gender equality and politics in Nigeria or otherwise in the whole world, because they believe that women's place is in the kitchen, and they believe that women don't have anything to offer due to their greed and selfishness on the men's side. They believe that they are the head of everything, both in the home, both in the politics, in the country, in power, in authority.
In terms of equity, I wouldn't say we have been able to achieve much, because, you know, like the proverb that says Rome was not built in a day. We started from somewhere. At this point, we are somewhere, and we still have a lot to achieve, which I believe that with time we'll get there.
A lot of women are being encouraged to come out and be entrepreneurs, politicians, executives, and all of that, but not as we would want it to be. The disparity is still large. The numbers are still far apart.
Remember, women are the bedrock of any society. No society will thrive without women. Women can do more if given the opportunity. For example, look at Ngozi Okonjo. She's a woman and she's performing very well internationally.
We are back, and you're watching Our Voices. Do you think you have what it takes to be a leader? Mindset and career growth coach Lindsay Machona Maenzanise says every woman does, but they just need to tap into their sense of purpose and network with other women to grow. She says confidence and boldness are equally important to lead effectively.
We need more women leaders in the world, for obvious reasons, and there weren't many of us. It's a challenge that we all agree needs to be addressed. And I've been on a journey where I desired to be in a leadership position so I could increase my influence and my impact. And so I want to take other women on that journey using the skills and experiences that I personally had to move them along that path.
Are you encouraged by some recent developments of, leadership of women? You have here in the United States a woman vice president for the very first time, the World Trade Organization, WTO. And then, of course, you've also had presidents in Africa and in high leadership positions as well. Would you say those are starting to show the possibilities of women? And how do you integrate that now into your coaching?
It's giving women hope. And it's important. The other aspect that's really important when it comes to leadership is when women see representation. When they see somebody like them occupying the spaces that they themselves desire to occupy, it inspires them and it shows them what is possible.
Several reasons why women fear leadership or even stepping up when it comes down to leading and being in control or being in a position of power. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
First and foremost, it's difficult for somebody to fully step out as themselves when they don't understand their purpose. So it's actually important that women understand and become clear about the change that they want to make, about the reason why they're here, because it is that purpose that gives them the strength to get up when they fall. Without the purpose, it's very difficult to accept, failure as feedback and try again. And the other thing as well is networks of support are very, very important. Like that sisterhood, which I believe should be global, is really needed to support women that want to step up into leadership positions, because it can be very lonely up there. So when you have a tribe of sisters that can support you in the different areas that you need support, then you're actually able to succeed in the goals that you seek for yourself.
What encourages you about what you're seeing in terms of how women are showing up?
I'm encouraged by the fact that we have some men that are becoming allies for women's rights and women's empowerment. That encourages me a lot, because when that shift begins to happen, then there's a possibility of influencing other men to jump on board with the idea of supporting women. Personally, what has been inspiring me is the vision of a world that I want my daughter to live in when she becomes a woman. And so I'm asking myself, what can I do now? What contribution can I make to make sure that that world becomes a reality, so that my daughter and all the other young girls in the world that are growing up will have a better world that respects their rights and sees them as equal human beings. I want to see women being more confident in who they are. They already have what it takes. They just need to believe in themselves that they can actually create and make the difference that they want to make. Ultimately, that is where it starts. It begins with you becoming the person and owning the identity of the individual who can then create the change and influence that you want to have.
And that's our show for this week. On behalf of Our Voices colleagues, thank you for watching. I'm Ndimyake Mwakalyelye. Stay safe.